I've always been the kind of person who believed in helping family, no matter the cost. It's how I was raised: help your loved ones, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how much it takes from you. I was the rock of the family, always available to lend a hand, always taking on more than my fair share. But over the years, something inside me began to change. I began to notice that while I was constantly giving, it felt like I was receiving nothing in return. And worst of all, the ones I was helping, my brother, my sister, and even my parents, seemed to take advantage of my kindness, as if they expected it. It was subtle at first, just small things, small inconveniences piled on top of each other, until one day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My brother, Dylan, was the first to push it. He had come back to stay at my place, just temporarily, he promised. But that temporary stay stretched on for months. He'd moved in with a vague plan to get back on his feet, but somehow, every time I turned around, he was still there, taking up space, leaving his stuff everywhere, and constantly asking for money for this or that. And when he didn't get it, he'd pout or guilt-trip me into helping him again. Then there was Sarah, my sister. She came to visit one afternoon, saying she was in town for a few days, but somehow, she ended up staying with me for weeks, and then months. I didn't mind at first, because we were close, but she quickly became just another presence in my home, demanding my attention while contributing nothing in return. When I asked for help around the house or for some respect for my space, she would laugh it off, saying, "You're always so uptight." It wasn't just the house that became strained. My relationship with my parents was slowly being torn apart as well. They'd call me for advice or favors, but they were always too busy with their own lives to check in on me, let alone offer anything in return. It started to feel like I was the family's personal bank, therapist, and unpaid maid. I was exhausted, mentally drained, and felt completely taken for granted. But it took one moment, one conversation, to make me realize that enough was enough. I remember it so clearly. It was a Saturday morning, the sky was overcast, and the air felt thick with tension. My parents were sitting in the living room when Sarah and Dylan walked in. We were all supposed to have a casual breakfast together, but I could feel the unease in the air as soon as I walked into the room. My mother, looking tired as usual, glanced up at me with a nervous expression. "Emily, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of worry. I sat down across from her, but I didn't say anything. I had learned over the years that when my mother said we needed to talk, it wasn't ever good news. Dylan was standing by the window, his arms crossed, while Sarah was pacing in the kitchen. It was clear they had been planning something, and I wasn't sure whether I should brace myself for bad news or prepare for another round of their complaints about how I wasn't doing enough. "We've been talking," Dylan started, his tone almost casual. "And we think it might be time for us to stay here for a little while longer." I could feel my stomach tighten. "How much longer?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Well, you know, things aren't really going well for us right now, and we just need some stability." "We're not asking for much, just a few more months," Sarah added, her voice sweet, but there was an underlying sense of entitlement in her words. The room felt smaller. My heart began to race as I glanced between them, my parents sitting silently. They were always the ones to back up their children, but I couldn't do this anymore. I had given them everything, my space, my time, my energy, and they were taking it all for granted. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I could keep giving without expecting anything in return. The thought of another few months with them living under my roof was unbearable, and I felt a cold rush of anger and frustration. I had worked so hard for everything I had, and yet here they were, treating me like a doormat. This was my home, my life, and I had every right to feel comfortable in it. For the first time, I opened my mouth to speak my truth. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I can't keep doing this. I've been giving and giving, and I've let you all stay here without saying anything, but I can't do it anymore. You need to find your own place to stay." Silence. For a moment, no one spoke. I could feel the weight of their surprise in the air. Dylan's face twisted in disbelief, while Sarah crossed her arms defensively. "What do you mean? We're family. You can't just kick us out. Dylan spat, his tone rising. I took a deep breath. I've let you both stay here far too long. You've overstayed your welcome, and it's time for you to take responsibility for your own lives. I've given you every chance to get it together, but you've taken advantage of my kindness, and that's not okay anymore. My mother finally spoke up, her voice trembling. Emily, don't do this. We're family. Please, don't push us away. I turned to her, my expression hardening. I'm not pushing you away. But if you can't respect me, then this is how it has to be. I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness for all of you. I need my space, my boundaries, and you need to understand that. My father stayed quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet my eyes. This was a moment that none of us had ever anticipated, a breaking point. And in that moment, I realized something important. The people I loved had been taking advantage of me, and I was the only one who could change it. As the tension hung in the air, I made a decision. The next day, I would be giving them an ultimatum. They had 24 hours to find somewhere else to stay, and I wasn't going to back down. The night was quiet after that tense conversation. I could feel the pressure building inside me, but there was no turning back now. I knew I was doing the right thing, but that didn't make it any easier. The idea of actually following through on my ultimatum filled me with a strange mix of dread and relief. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who kept the harmony, who tried to fix things. But this time, I knew I couldn't fix it. This time, I had to stand firm. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind already racing with thoughts of what I had to do. I could already hear the tension in the house, my brother's footsteps upstairs, my sister murmuring to herself as she prepared breakfast. Everything felt different, as though the calm before the storm had settled over us. There was no longer a sense of comfort or familiarity in the air. I could feel my heart sinking with every passing minute, but I had to do it. They had pushed me too far. I walked down the stairs and into the kitchen, where my parents were already sitting at the table. The smell of coffee filled the air, but there was no warmth to it this time. My father's face was unreadable, his expression distant. My mother looked tired, her eyes swollen from the tears she had shed the night before. But they knew what had to happen. They knew I wasn't going to back down. Mom, Dad, I began, my voice steady, though my insides were in turmoil. I need to talk to you about what's going to happen today. My father didn't look up from his coffee, but my mother's eyes met mine. She sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was on them. Emily, sweetheart, we didn't expect things to go this far. But you're right. We can't keep doing this. I nodded. It wasn't easy for her to admit, but it was a step in the right direction. My mother had always been the one who tried to smooth things over, to make everyone happy. But I knew that, deep down, she had to understand that I wasn't being selfish. I was simply demanding the respect I deserved. I'm giving them 24 hours, I continued, my voice gaining strength. If they don't leave by then, I'm going to take legal action. I can't keep going on like this, Mom. Her face twisted with a mixture of sadness and concern. But their family, Emily. They don't have anywhere to go. They'll figure it out, I said firmly. They've had plenty of time to get their act together. They've used me, and they've used you, and it ends today. If they respect me, they'll stay. If not, they leave. No more excuses. My mother's lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to argue. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded slowly, as though she had come to terms with the fact that this was the only way forward. The hours that followed felt like an eternity. I could hear the muffled sounds of Dylan and Sarah packing their things, moving slowly, as though they were still hoping they could talk me out of it. But I wasn't going to back down. The anger I had felt for so long was now replaced with a quiet, unwavering determination. I had set this boundary, and I wasn't going to let them cross it. By noon, I could hear their footsteps in the hallway, and I knew it was time. Dylan knocked on my door, his voice tense when he spoke. Emily, Can we talk? I didn't move from my desk, where I had been sitting, the silence of my room echoing around me. I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation wasn't going to be easy. I opened the door, and there he was, standing in the hallway, looking every bit as frustrated as I felt. You can't be serious about this. You really want us out? He asked, his voice barely controlled. Yes, I replied firmly, folding my arms across my chest. I've given you 24 hours to get your things together. If you can't respect me, then you can't stay here. His face twisted with disbelief. We're family, Emily. You can't just throw us out. What happened to supporting each other? I could feel the anger rising inside me again, but I forced myself to stay calm. I've supported you, Dylan. I've supported all of you for so long, but it's always been on your terms, never mine. You've taken, and now it's time for you to start taking responsibility. If you want to stay, you need to respect me and my space. If you can't do that, then you leave. This is my house, and it's my decision. For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw clenched. I could see that he was searching for a way to argue, to turn this around. But the reality was beginning to settle in. He knew I wasn't going to give in. You really mean it, don't you? Dylan finally said, his voice quieter now. I nodded. I do, I replied. And if you're not gone in 24 hours, I'll take further action. I've already made up my mind. He let out a frustrated sigh but didn't say anything else. He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. I closed the door behind me, my heart still racing, but a strange sense of relief washing over me. I knew the hardest part was still to come. I would have to face Sarah next. But for now, I felt like I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, my space, and my dignity. It was the beginning of something new, and though I didn't know what would happen next, I knew I was ready. I had made my decision. And no matter what, I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me again. The afternoon dragged on in eerie silence, punctuated only by the soft clinks of moving boxes and the occasional creak of floorboards upstairs. Dylan and Sarah were packing their things, but there was no argument, no desperate pleading anymore. The weight of what was happening seemed to have settled over them, and although I could still hear the occasional murmurs between them, it was clear they were accepting the inevitable. I stayed in my room, the quiet of the house pressing down on me. The relief I had felt earlier was slowly giving way to something else, doubt. Could I really go through with this? Could I maintain this new version of myself, this woman who demanded respect and set boundaries? I had always been the one to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my own needs for the sake of others. But now, it felt different. Now, I had a spine. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about taking back my life. As the hours passed, my mind wandered back to all the times I had been taken for granted. The countless moments when my needs were ignored, my time was undervalued, and my sacrifices went unappreciated. My parents, well, mostly my mom, had always expected me to play the role of the peacemaker. They never questioned how much I was giving or how much I was hurting. And now, I was finally making them see the consequences of that. At around 3 o'clock, my mother came into my room again. She looked tired, a bit frazzled, and I could tell she had been crying. Her face was flushed, her eyes red, and she stood in the doorway, wringing her hands together. Emily, she started, her voice shaky. She was always hesitant when it came to conflict, always looking for a way to avoid confrontation. This time, though, she was at a loss for words. Mom, you don't have to say anything, I interrupted. I know you're upset, but this is for the best. They've taken advantage of me, of you, of all of us. If I don't do this now, nothing will ever change. She didn't argue. She simply stood there, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and something else, maybe understanding? Maybe regret? It was hard to tell. But her eyes said more than her words ever could. It wasn't that she didn't care about me. She did, in her own way. But I had been invisible to her for too long. She had let my brother and sister run all over me, and I had let it happen because I was afraid of rocking the boat. I don't want to lose you, Emily, she whispered, finally breaking the silence. I could feel my heart tighten at the words, but I stood firm. You won't lose me, Mom. But I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when it's not. I need to set boundaries, even if it hurts. She didn't answer right away. She just nodded and took a step back from the door. I'll go talk to your father, she murmured, walking away with a heavy sigh. I watched her leave, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision I had made. But there was no turning back. I had already made the hardest choice. By evening, Dylan and Sarah had finished packing. They hadn't spoken to me since our conversation earlier, and as I looked out the window, I saw their car parked in the driveway, ready to go. The finality of it all hit me like a wave. I had kicked my own family out of the house. I had taken a stand, and now I had to face the consequences. My dad didn't say anything when he came downstairs. He just poured himself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window, lost in thought. I knew he wasn't happy about what had happened, but he also knew that I wasn't going to back down. He had seen me struggle for years, always putting others' needs ahead of my own. And maybe, just maybe, he finally understood that I wasn't willing to sacrifice myself anymore. It was a strange feeling, this mix of empowerment and emptiness. I had stood up for myself, but at what cost? Later that night, as the house grew quieter, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led up to this moment. How had it gotten so bad? How had I let it go on for so long? I knew the answer. I had let my fear of confrontation, my desire to please, keep me in a cycle of abuse. I had allowed my family to take advantage of my generosity, and I had done nothing to stop it. But now, I had broken free. As the night stretched on, I could feel the tension in the house dissipating. Dylan and Sarah were gone, and while I hadn't received any apologies, I didn't expect them. I wasn't waiting for them to come back and beg me to reconsider. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to allow them to cross it again. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I was startled at first, but when I opened it, it was my mom standing there, her expression weary but somehow more open than before. Emily, she said quietly, stepping inside, can we talk? I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. I could tell she had been thinking a lot, probably processing everything that had happened. I know I've made mistakes, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I never should have let things get this far. I should have supported you more. I didn't say anything right away. I just listened, letting her words wash over me. I had been waiting for an apology like this for years, but now, it felt bittersweet. I had been waiting for this moment, but part of me wondered if it was too little, too late. Mom, I said softly, sitting on the edge of my bed, it's not about the apology. It's about understanding that I can't keep living for everyone else. I matter too. And I have to set boundaries, or I'll lose myself completely. She sat beside me, her eyes filled with tears. I know, Emily. And I'm sorry. We'll fix this. I'll help you with everything. I promise. I smiled faintly, though the weight of the situation still hung heavy in the air. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this would be the beginning of real change or if we would fall back into old patterns. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope. We'll take it one step at a time, I said quietly. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I truly felt like things could change. The next few days were a blur of emotion and uncertainty. Dylan and Sarah were gone, and the house, once filled with tension, was quieter, but the peace felt strange. It wasn't that I was unhappy, no, it was more like a part of me was still processing everything that had happened. I had kicked my own family out of my house, stood up for myself in a way I never had before, and it felt liberating, but also lonely. It wasn't just about the eviction. It was about all the years of frustration, all the times I had been overlooked, all the instances when my needs had been placed at the bottom of the priority list. And in some ways, I felt proud of myself for not backing down. But in others, I wondered if I had made the right call. Was this really the best solution? Was I becoming too cold, too distant? My head spun with conflicting thoughts. Over the next few days, I spent a lot of time alone in my room. The house seemed to echo with emptiness, and even though it was peaceful, it felt unsettling. For the first time in a long time, I had nothing but my thoughts to keep me company. But it wasn't just the silence that was unnerving, it was my relationship with my parents. My mom and I hadn't spoken much since that night. We exchanged the occasional quiet word, but nothing deep, nothing like the conversation we had had before Dylan and Sarah left. It was as if there was a silent understanding that something had shifted between us, but neither of us knew how to address it. One evening, about a week after the eviction, my mother came into my room. This time, there was no hesitation in her movements. She wasn't wringing her hands or looking at the floor. She came in with purpose, sitting on the edge of my bed, looking me straight in the eye. "Emily," she began, her voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. And I want you to know that I see now what I couldn't before. What you did was hard, but it was necessary. You needed to set boundaries, and I'm proud of you for doing it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just an apology or a simple acknowledgement, it was a recognition. A deep, genuine understanding of what I had done and why I had done it. For the first time, I felt like she truly saw me, not just as her daughter, but as an individual with my own needs, desires, and rights. "Thank you, Mom," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. It wasn't easy for me either. I don't want to be a doormat anymore. I've spent so much of my life trying to keep the peace, to make everyone else happy, and I've forgotten about myself. I don't want to keep doing that. She nodded, her face softening with understanding. "I know, sweetheart. I see that now. And I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner. We've all taken you for granted. I've taken you for granted. But I promise, things will change. I didn't know if I could trust that things would change, but I wanted to. I wanted to believe that this moment marked a shift, not just for me, but for all of us. That this was the beginning of something new, a new way of relating to one another, where my boundaries were respected, where my feelings mattered as much as anyone else's." "Thank you for saying that," I whispered. "It means more than you know." For the rest of the evening, we sat in comfortable silence, something that felt foreign but welcome. There was no fighting, no tension, just a quiet hum of understanding between us. It was a small step, but it was progress. The next few days were spent figuring out what came next. Dylan and Sarah had found a place to stay, though I didn't keep in touch with them. They hadn't reached out either, and part of me wondered if they were even sorry for how things had gone down. But it didn't matter. The ball was in their court now. If they wanted a relationship with me, they had to put in the effort. I wasn't going to be the one to keep chasing them anymore. That part of my life was over. Meanwhile, I focused on the house, my work, and rebuilding my own sense of self. I spent more time with my mom, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were having real conversations. Not about the surface-level things we had always talked about, but about deeper topics. We talked about our feelings, our struggles, our fears. And it felt like we were finally seeing eye to eye. Slowly, I began to trust that change was possible, not just for me, but for all of us. But even as things started to settle, there was still a nagging sense of anxiety in the pit of my stomach. What if this didn't last? What if I slipped back into old patterns of people-pleasing? What if, deep down, I was still that same person who couldn't say no, who was too afraid to disappoint anyone? It was a fear I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. And that was when I realized that setting boundaries wasn't a one-time thing. It was an ongoing process. Every day, I had to remind myself that I was worthy of respect. That my needs and desires mattered. That it wasn't selfish to put myself first. It was necessary for my well-being. And that realization, while scary, was also empowering. One evening, as I was sitting on the couch with my mom, watching TV, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression on her face. Emily, I've been thinking, she said. I know things have been difficult, and I don't want you to feel like you have to carry everything on your own anymore. You don't have to. We're a family. And we need to start acting like it. I smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through me. I'm not doing it alone, Mom. But I am learning to take care of myself, too. She nodded. That's what I'm learning, too. It wasn't perfect, and there was still a lot of work to do. But in that moment, I realized that this was the first time in my life that I wasn't afraid to be myself. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace with who I was. As the days passed, I continued to set boundaries. I continued to prioritize my own well-being. And slowly, my family and I started to rebuild, not just our relationships, but our lives. It wouldn't happen overnight, but I was no longer afraid to fight for the life I wanted. And for the first time, I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it with confidence, self-respect, and a newfound sense of peace. Bande Noi. A few weeks had passed since the dust settled. The initial shock of the eviction, the emotional weight of it all, was starting to lift. There was still a quiet unease beneath the surface, but it wasn't the same tense silence that used to hang in the air. It was the calm of a house that had been redefined, a home that was beginning to find its rhythm again. My relationship with my mom had evolved in unexpected ways. After our heart-to-heart conversation, things between us shifted. We talked more openly now, discussing everything from trivial daily happenings to deeper fears and dreams. I could sense a growing respect between us. No longer was I just a daughter she needed to manage, but an equal with my own voice, my own opinions, and my own needs. Still, there was something unsettling about how little we had truly communicated over the years. I had spent most of my life being the quiet one, the one who kept her head down and tried to maintain peace. It was so ingrained in me that even now, when things were finally calm, I found myself hesitating before I spoke up. But with time, I realized that the longer I kept silent, the more I allowed myself to slip into old habits. I had to remind myself daily that the change I had fought for wasn't just about kicking out Dylan and Sarah. It was about rewriting the narrative of who I was, someone who had value, someone whose feelings mattered. I began setting small, healthy boundaries with my mom and dad, not in the same dramatic way as before, but in quiet, everyday moments. When I felt overwhelmed, I started saying no to plans that weren't right for me. When I felt my space being invaded, I gently but firmly asked for some time alone. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I worried about disappointing them or making them angry. But each time I enforced those boundaries, it felt like a victory. As for Dylan and Sarah, they didn't reach out. Part of me wished they would, that maybe they would come to their senses and apologize for the mess they had caused. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the same person who had once craved their approval. I had learned that no matter how much I loved them, I couldn't allow myself to be manipulated any longer. I couldn't sacrifice my happiness for their comfort. A couple of weeks after their departure, I found myself thinking about the nature of family and what it truly meant to me. I had always believed that family was everything, that blood ties should make us stick together no matter what. But my experience had forced me to rethink that. Family wasn't just about shared history or genetic connections, it was about mutual respect, trust, and care. It was about being there for each other, not as a burden, but as equals. And if anyone in my family couldn't offer that, then maybe it wasn't worth trying to keep the relationship alive. One afternoon, my father came to visit me in my room. This wasn't unusual. We often shared quiet moments together now, usually over a cup of tea or a casual conversation. But today, his expression was different. It was a mix of concern and determination. He sat beside me on the bed and looked at me with those familiar eyes, full of quiet understanding. Emily, I know things have been hard. I don't always show it, but I see how much you've been carrying, he said, his voice steady. And I want you to know I've realized something. I haven't always been there when you needed me most. My heart tightened. My dad had always been a man of few words, and though I loved him, I didn't always feel like I could talk to him. His quiet demeanor had sometimes felt like indifference to me, especially when I was younger, but today, something felt different. Today, he was opening up in a way I hadn't seen before. "You've carried a lot of weight for all of us, and for too long, I took that for granted. I want to do better," he continued, his voice softer now. "I know I'm not perfect, but I want to support you in a way that respects who you are now, not just who I want you to be." It was as if the last few weeks had finally cracked open something inside him. My father wasn't a man prone to showing emotion, but today, his words spoke volumes. I didn't expect him to change overnight, but I knew this was a shift, a glimpse of something better. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future of our relationship. "I'm glad you said that, Dad," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "It's hard, you know? I don't want to be distant, but I also can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We'll take it one step at a time." And that was all I could ask for. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to take the lead. I wasn't afraid to speak my truth, no matter how difficult it was. I wasn't afraid to ask for the space and respect I deserved. And in that moment, I knew that my journey wasn't over, but I was no longer walking it alone. The weeks turned into months, and the silence that had once hung over the house gave way to something gentler, quieter. My parents and I still had our ups and downs, but we were learning how to navigate them with more grace, more honesty. My mom and I would go on walks together, talking about everything and nothing, and it felt like we were truly connecting for the first time. My dad and I spent evenings watching old movies, exchanging rare moments of father-daughter bonding. The weight of my past, of their expectations, of my self-sacrifice, was slowly lifting. But it wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about me. It was about learning to love myself enough to set boundaries, to protect my peace, and to never again let anyone, family or otherwise, take advantage of my kindness. I realized that I couldn't control what others did, but I could control how I responded. I could choose my own happiness, even if it meant making hard decisions. And so, with each passing day, I continued to rebuild my life. Slowly, piece by piece, I was finding myself again. And while the road ahead would never be easy, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready for whatever came next. And this time, I wouldn't back down. Not for anyone. Not for anything.